Please stand. Thank you.
The next witness, my lord, is Ken Hall.
Ken Hall. Thank you. Sorry. Good afternoon, Mr. Hall. As you appreciate, you're about to be asked questions by Mr. McClellan. But before doing that, I understand you're prepared to take the oath. Sitting where you are, if you would just raise your right hand and repeat these words after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That I will tell the truth.
That I will tell the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hall. What I say to every witness, in large part because I'm hard of hearing, is I much appreciate it if you speak just a little bit more loudly than you would normally and perhaps a little more slowly. I want to hear what you have to say, as do the rest of the people in what's quite a large space. We'll be sitting from until about 4, and we may finish the evidence in that time, but we'll consider matters then. We may sit a little after, or we may break until tomorrow. But if at any stage you want to take a break, just give me an indication and we will take a break. Just feel that you're entirely in control of that. Now, Mr. McClellan.
Thank you, my lord. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could you please confirm your name?
Kenneth Hall.
And you've given evidence to this inquiry on a previous occasion, is that right?
Yeah.
Have you provided a further witness statement in relation to this set of hearings?
I have, yes.
If we could have on the screen, please, Witness Statement Bundle, Volume 2, page 42. And do you see there your statement, Mr. Hall?
I do, yes.
And does that statement set out fully and truthfully your evidence on the matters that it addresses?
It does, yes.
And is there anything in it that you think needs to be changed or corrected?
No.
In relation to your experience and expertise, as you've explained to the inquiry before, you're an electrical engineer by background. Is that right?
That's correct.
And for the last 13 or 14 years have specialised as a healthcare building services engineer.
That's correct.
And are you still employed by Multiplex?
Yes.
And of course, you worked for Multiplex at the time of the RHCYP project. Yes. And at that time, on that project and after financial close, your role was to manage the development of the design for mechanical, electrical and plumbing installations.
It was.
Yeah. And the design was being produced by Multiplex's subcontractor, Wallace Whittle.
That's correct.
And could you just explain your role in the process of finalising the design?
Effectively, it was working with the team at Wallace Whittle and ensuring that their design was produced and interacting with the actual board from the NHS's side to ensure that we got agreement.
And were you working as part of a team of people in Multiplex?
Yes,
How many people were involved in the management or review of the design?
Is this specifically to MEP or is this for...
Sorry, I should say for ventilation systems.
For ventilation systems, there's kind of pre-construction and construction, and the teams are kind of split in that order. But in terms of pre-construction, it was really myself that led that.
Okay, and you say led it. How many people did you have working with you on it?
None.
None, okay. Now, you yourself were not a designer, is that right?
Previously I've been one, but not latterly.
And not on this project?
No.
Was it any part of your role to ensure or check that the design being produced by Wallace Whittle for ventilation complied with the guidance?
Well, the role really is effectively engaging with Wallace Whittle, who were the designers, ensuring that they were using the correct documents, maybe reports, really interacting with them and going through it, but not going through it as a design engineer. No.
No. So, for example, would you see it as part of your role to go through the entries in the environmental matrix and check them for compliance with guidance, or would you rely on Wallace Whittle to do that?
Wallace Whittle had their own quality standards, and so effectively that was their role. But my role was more about ensuring that they were using the correct documents, perhaps using the latest drawings. There's a whole series of items that make up the design, and so you are deep within it, but not specifically taking a document to go through every single line to look to see if it complies, because effectively the client's requirements had already been reviewed, and what we had was what the client was looking for in terms of if we use the environmental matrix as an example.
Okay. So just picking up on that last statement, was your understanding that the parameters in the environmental matrix were part of the board's construction requirements, which Project Co were obliged to deliver?
Yes.
And I think you explained previously when you gave evidence you understood the environmental matrix was reviewable design data to the extent of 7 comments which had been made against it by the board.
That's correct.
Is that right? Yeah. Now, in paragraphs 5 to 21 of your witness statement for this hearing, you discuss exchanges after financial close about the ventilation design, and that's the period from May to December 2015. And you explain that this led up to the formal submission of version 2 of the environmental matrix under the contractual reviewable design data procedure by IHSL to NHSL. Now, if we could go please to bundle 13, volume 2, page 97. You should see on screen there in front of you, Mr. Hall, an email dated the 4th of December 2015 from Multiplex to various recipients, including at Mott MacDonald. The subject heading of the email is RDD Review Environmental Matrix, and it says, please find attached RDD documents for information. And then if we could scroll down to page 100, please. Actually, sorry, if we could go back a page to, I think, 99. Yeah, so we see here, this is the environmental matrix, and we've got a version date of the 26th of November 2015. You see that,
yep.
Mr. Hall? Yeah. And we also see there in the box, document highlighted items amended in line with NHS comments. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, and then if we go forward to page 100, please. And we see here a table with 7 lines in it. And then beside the numbers, there's a column headed up item. Do you recognise those as the issues which had been raised by NHSL and which had been left unresolved at financial close?
When you say unresolved, I'm just looking at, for instance, point 4. on the balance negative pressure.
Yeah, it was a poorly phrased question on my part. Do you recognise these as the 7 comments about the environmental matrix which had been recorded in the reviewable design data schedule of the project agreement? Yeah. And to what extent had the revision of the environmental matrix after financial close up to this point been to address those 7 points?
Yeah, so the whole purpose back in May, we were now in the construction phase. I was aware that we had to resolve these 7 points in the environmental matrix, and the engagement with MOTS in May time was to resolve these 7 points. So Wallace Whittle pulled together the comments. We tried to use a draft format to go back and forward so that we would effectively have the comments resolved, and that would be the document, you know, a line under the sand.
So had the work up to that point by Wallace Whittle and Multiplex been confined to addressing those 7 points that had been recorded in the project agreement?
Well, in addition to that, then other aspects crept in, where other points had to be addressed.
Okay. If we could go please to page 101. Now, if we can maybe zoom in on, well, just before we zoom in, do you see there, Mr. Hall, that there's some text in red?
Yep.
Is that text in red to denote the fact that it's a change from the preceding version of the matrix?
Yep.
And as we saw on the first page, there was a note that said that some changes were highlighted. Now, do you recall if there was an agreement amongst the parties that changes to the environmental matrix would be marked in red in that way?
I don't recall a formal agreement on how the whole change process was to be done, but it's not uncommon to highlight a change in a colour.
I mean, you said there wasn't a formal agreement, but was there an understanding that it would be done?
I'm not sure if there really was, or it was just accepted that that's what we would do to change.
I mean, Mr. Greer describes it as good industry practice to mark changes in that way when going through a design review process. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
And so we see those changes are marked, but there is another change in these guidance notes from earlier versions of the matrix, and that's at guidance note 15. So if we could perhaps zoom in a bit so that we can read that a bit more easily. And you do address this briefly in your statement, Mr. Hall. If you see guidance note 15 there, and you see reading down towards the bottom of guidance note 15, which is quite a long one, there's a section marked critical care areas.
Yeah.
Okay, and it reads critical care areas, design criteria, SHTM 0301, Appendix 1 for air change rates, 10 air changes per hour supply for isolation cubicles. If we just stop there, the words for isolation cubicles didn't apply or didn't exist in the previous version of this matrix. I mean, you're aware of that, aren't you?
Yeah.
And this was a change which Wallace Whittle had made to guidance note 15. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
But it's obviously not marked in red as the other changes had been. And as I say, you were asked about this, and in your statement, what you say, it's a paragraph 109 for anyone who wants a reference, that you weren't aware of it. You weren't aware of the change having been made at the time and can't comment further. So do you mean you weren't aware that this, at the time, that this change had been made? Is that right?
The wording change, yeah, I wasn't aware.
As far as you know, was anybody else at Multiplex aware at the time the change had been made?
No.
Now, you say in your statement that you can't comment further, but I'm going to ask you a few more questions in any event. Do you think that the change is material?
Well, obviously, when it's been made aware to me, I've done a little bit of research on it just to track it and follow it. And the main thing that I'd done was I looked at the actual figures within the spreadsheet, and they weren't changed. And in addition to that, there was dialogue at the time, which is in my statement, around isolation cubicles, and Wallace Whittle were seeking clarifications through an RFI to MOTS. So there had been some dialogue. The fact that the figures, because I said at the last hearing that my belief is that the environmental matrix is it's a summary of the figures that the designers then use to do their detailed design, and so they're focused in on the actual numbers within the spreadsheet. And in reality, they weren't changed. So for Wallace Whittle's design, it was still the same figures, regardless of whether a change had been made on a line there.
So the change in and of itself, it wasn't material?
Did you say was or wasn't?
Yeah, was it material?
In my opinion, it wasn't material because the client's requirements in terms of the actual design figures remained the same.
Okay, well, if we take the wording of the guidance note in and of itself, before the words "for isolation cubicles" were added, that guidance note specifies 10 air changes per hour supply in the critical care areas, and it does it without any qualification. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I've looked at it, the previous version, when this was made aware to me, so yeah, that's correct.
And after the change, after those words are added, it restricts the 10 air change per hour requirement to isolation cubicles only. Do you accept that?
Yes,
So just in and of itself, in that guidance note, that is a material restriction in the meaning of the guidance note, is it not?
Well, as I've kind of tried to explain, that the key thing about the environmental matrix was not for somebody to be taking all these notes and actually then using them to design. That work had already been done, so effectively the client's requirements were already defined in the actual body of the spreadsheet, and that remained the same.
Okay, so are you referring there to the part of the matrix where there are particular parameters specified for each room in the hospital?
Yeah, the figures.
Okay. And we can go to it if you need to, but I think you can probably do this from memory, that if we were to go to that part of the matrix for department B1, the critical care department, we would see there the choice of 4 air changes per hour for the single bed and open plan bays in the critical care area. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Yep. So if we look again at the guidance note, would you accept that before the change is made, so before the words "for isolation cubicles" are added, there's a contradiction within the matrix in that the guidance note requires 10 air changes per hour for critical care areas, but the individual rooms specify 4 air changes per hour?
Well, the contradiction existed before that change.
Yes, that's what I mean. So there was a contradiction. So I think we're agreeing. There was a contradiction before the change was made.
Yeah.
And the effect of the change is to remove the contradiction.
Yeah, I see how you're, yeah.
So is that a change which should have been brought expressly to the attention of NHSL?
Well, I guess Wallace Whittle would need to understand why they didn't highlight it. But in reality, what I've said, that there was dialogue that came to this aspect. So it wasn't that it was done in isolation and nobody knew, in terms of the actual, the wording and the RFI, and, you can track through what Wallace Whittle were doing, and they were clear in how they were making their assumptions.
Okay, so do you mean that there was correspondence between Wallace Whittle and either the Health Board or the Health Board's representatives to make clear that insofar as tenure changes per hour were specified for critical care areas, that was only to be in the isolation rooms and for no others?
Yes.
And are you able to tell us when and where we could find that correspondence?
Well, it's actually in my statement.
Okay, I have read all the correspondence that's referred to in your statement, and I didn't find anything which would have clarified that. Do you have a copy of your statement there, Mr. Hall?
I do, yeah.
Are you able to give us a paragraph reference?
So if we go to paragraph 16.
Yeah, so if we could bring that up on screen, please. This is, bear with me, Witness Statement Bundle, Volume 2. Page 45. So what you say there is that on the 22nd of September, I think that year must be wrong, perhaps 2015, Wallace Whittle then issued a query seeking guidance in relation to isolation cubicles, which I forwarded to Mock MacDonald on the same date. Mock MacDonald responded on the 25th of September 2015, and I forwarded their response to Wallace Whittle. And then it carries on. So is that the correspondence which you say clarifies the matter of air changes in the critical care department?
Yes.
I mean, we can go through it if it's helpful, but my recollection of that correspondence is that whilst it discusses the isolation rooms, it doesn't say anything about the other patient spaces in the critical care department. Is that a fair recollection of it?
Well, it discusses the two types of isolation rooms, and then there's a clarification, I think, from Watts. So when you say the other rooms, can I ask which ones you're referring to?
The non-isolation rooms in the critical care department. So the spaces for patients, the single bed rooms and the open plan bays in the critical care department. And what I'm wondering is whether there was anything in those exchanges to confirm that there wasn't a requirement of tenure changes per hour in relation to those.
Not explicitly, no.
No.
The reason I was quoting that is to back up the change that Wallace Whittle had made, but it was to do with the isolation. But it doesn't go into the detail of all the other spaces, no.
mean, you've helpfully given us the references to that correspondence. Is there anything else that you're aware of that you would regard as having supported the change that Wallace Whittle made to the matrix, or is it confined to that correspondence that you've referred to in your statement?
No, I think that's where I'm relating. I mean, I've never discussed this with Wallace Whittle, so I just don't know what they were thinking at the time. This is me making assumptions, really, and joining it together that they were asking the request and they were looking at the matrix, and then the output of this request, they then altered that matrix. But that's an assumption from me.
Yeah.
It's not fact.
Okay. I mean, if I could just put it this way, if the change to the matrix had been marked in red or otherwise explicitly brought to the attention of NHSL, would you accept that it would have given the health board the opportunity to consider what they wanted, whether they wanted 4 air changes per hour or 10 air changes per hour in the single and multi-bed rooms in the critical care department?
Well, my view by that time, it wasn't an option. It had already been defined.
And that's on the basis that you were taking the environmental matrix as a fixed brief of the health board's requirements?
Yeah.
But I think you accepted a moment ago that prior to the change being made, the matrix was actually contradictory in that on one page it said 10 air changes per hour for critical care areas, but then in another it said 4.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously making assumptions, and the original person, presumably who was Hull and Kirkwood, I don't know what they were assuming when they wrote that, but it seems odd that, the wording that perhaps Hull and Kirkwood had written was not correct, because how we ended up with the figures in the actual spreadsheet. So it's very hypothetical, and I don't think there's a factual answer.
Well, do you accept that by not highlighting the change, the health board were denied the opportunity to make a choice between 4 and 6? Between 4 and 10 air changes.
Yes.
The change that was made by Wallace Whittle reflects Stuart McKechnie's interpretation of the SHTM guidance. And in his view, the recommendation of 10 air changes per hour and 10 pascals of positive pressure for critical areas only applied to isolation rooms. That's his view. That's his interpretation of the guidance. So were you aware at the time that Mr. McKechnie was proceeding on the basis of that interpretation of the guidance?
My understanding was that we were working to the client's brief, and what was contained within the environmental matrix was what we were designing to.
Yeah, okay. So a moment ago we were looking at what was revision 2 of the environmental matrix, and what you say in your statement is that you were surprised at the extent of the comments made by NHSL on that draft. And if we could go please to Bundle 13, Volume 2, page 134. And we see here, I think you should have it on the screen in front of you, Mr. Hall. It's an email from Mott MacDonald to you and others at Multiplex, 20th of January 2016. And what Camille from Mott MacDonald says is, please find attached board's initial comments on the environmental matrix. As briefly discussed at the PMG on 13 January and yesterday with Ken Hall, the workshop is required to discuss board's comments. The workshop has now been arranged for Tuesday 26 January at 10 a.m. Note the review is not complete, and the board will require XLS version of the matrix to comprehensively review it and provide remaining comments prior to the workshop. Please forward an Excel version of the environmental matrix. What did you understand to be the scope of the review being carried out by NHSL and Mott MacDonald on the environmental matrix?
Based on that email or based just generally?
Well, you can take that email into account, but just in general.
My understanding was that that they were reviewing not just the environmental matrix, but all of it in terms of the detailed design to ensure that it was meeting the client's requirements.
The phrase that Mr. Kolodjicek used was he was looking for an Excel version of the matrix to comprehensively review it and provide remaining comments. Well, what did you take from that, if anything?
At the time, I didn't. I mean, the whole issue was that we had an environmental matrix where we had 7 points. I'd engaged with Motts in May, and in reality, I thought that that was going to conclude the review. So when that came out, I didn't really, there wasn't an alarm bell or anything that there was an issue. I just thought they were doing, their final sweep up and review, which I took as positive.
And then if we could go forward to page 136, please, we can see the board's comments. And that's the first page. And if we could just scroll down to the second page, and then the third. So we see there that what the board has described as initial comments on the matrix extended to 40 comments. And was that the extent of things that came as a surprise to you?
That was certainly a surprise, but I think ultimately there was 50 comments in total.
Yeah, so more in due course.
Yeah.
And how thorough did you understand the checking or the review of the matrix by NHSL and Mott MacDonald to be?
Well, certainly given the time, I assumed that it was a thorough review, that they were just ensuring that the client's requirements were definitely what they still wanted, and this was the output of what they had found.
If what Graham Greer of Mott MacDonald says in his statement about it, and the reference, we don't need to bring this up on screen, but the reference is Witness Statement Bundle 2 at page 6. He said, I'm just going to read from it. He's talking about the checks being done by NHSL and Mott MacDonald, and he said, my understanding is that NHSL entered into a contract with Project Co to undertake the design in accordance with Project Co's own quality assurance procedures. The design would therefore be checked and approved by Project Co prior to issuing RDD submissions through the review procedure. NHSL were therefore relying on Project Co's own design assurance and did not undertake a line-by-line review themselves. Does that reflect your understanding of what Mott MacDonald and NHSL were doing?
Well, in relation to design, I would agree that that was Project Co that were responsible for the design, but what we're talking about here is a client's requirements. This is a document that reflects what the client wants, and then ultimately once that document is agreed, Wallace Whittle then would take that document to then take responsibility to do the design. But in terms of the actual contents of the environmental matrix, you know, a quality check, we wouldn't be able to do a quality check in terms of verifying that the clinical team had asked for a certain air change with a certain room. So that aspect, I think it needs to be split between, you have the client's requirements, and that's a document, and I don't see that as design. Mm-hmm. And then you then have actually design, and that's what we were contracted to do.
Okay. So you said that you regarded the environmental matrix as the client's brief. And so insofar as that was going through the contract design review process, did you understand the purpose of that as being to finalise or clarify NHSL's brief?
In relation to the environmental matrix?
Yes.
Yeah, so my understanding after contract award was that we were updating these 7 points. We would then have a document that represented the client's requirements. And then during the contract, there may well be changes and issues that have to be resulting in the environmental matrix getting updated, and that would go through for RDD. But I didn't see it as an avalanche of comments after construction was awarded.
Yeah. Okay. If you could go, please, to Bundle 13, Volume 2, at page 159. This is an email from you to John Bushfield at Wallace Whittle on the 10th of February 2016. Hi, John. Feedback from the board based on the 2 meetings reviewing the matrix. I will speak to Project Co about this being a status C. Just pause there. That's one of the non-approved statuses of an item in the RDD
yes,
process.
Level C and rejected.
So rejected by the board. However, it's quite a risk to the project having this rejected, and then so on. What did you mean by that?
The risk to the project?
Yeah, when you say it was quite a risk to the project having this rejected, what did you mean?
Well, in reality, you know, what we expected at the May time to resolve the 7 points, and then for Wallace Whittle to get cracking with their design, because the matrix informs what their design will be. And in reality, that started in May, and we're now into February, and we're sitting with a rejected matrix that we just didn't know was coming, and it impacted on the design programme that Wallace Whittle were having to adhere to. And in reality, the risk was that, you know, here were more comments coming on a document that we thought was the client's requirements in the previous iteration.
So the risk was to the certainty of the programme for the project. Was that what
That's one aspect, but also just in general terms, it felt like it was now getting changed, and that, I mean, I don't deal with the commercial side, but it could have had an impact on that. But just generally, what do we have to now review to see what impact there is on the actual infrastructure of the project? And you know, so there was many facets to it.
Mm-hmm. If we go, please, to Bundle 13, Volume 2, page 169. In fact, if we make it page 172, please. We can see there from the box at the left This is revision 5 of the environmental matrix, and it's taking account of comments up to the 11th of February 2016. And then if we could go forward to the next page, please. We see there that's a table of responses and so on to the original 7 comments about the matrix. Is that right?
Yeah.
Then if we go forward to the page after that, there's a new table, and we see the left-hand column goes up to number 9. And in fact, the document runs on for another 4 or 5 pages. And just briefly, what was this?
Well, effectively, these were the changes that the board had asked to make to their own requirements.
And so we see there that there's a list, the second column is headed up NHSL comment. Are those taken from the document we saw a moment ago with the big long list of comments?
Yeah.
And if you look along to the right-hand side of the table, there are 2 columns, FC comment and post-FC comment. What were those there for?
Yeah, so that was to distinguish if the comment was before financial close or if it was after.
And the significance of it coming after financial close was what, in your view?
Well, it wasn't included for. We weren't aware of it when we signed the contract, basically.
So did you mean it's something that might give rise to a contractual change at the instance of the board?
Yeah.
Okay, and you explain in your statement that this version of the matrix came to be approved by NHSL at level B. So that means approved subject to whatever comments are made. Is that right?
Yeah.
And what you say in your statement was that, as far as you recall, none of the comments made by NHSL took issue with the pressure regime or the air change rates proposed in the matrix for the critical care department. Now, the contractual significance of that might be a matter of debate, but what did you take from that?
I took that, well, I guess in the bigger picture, we now had all these comments that had been made. We ultimately took them on board, and there was no contractual issue in terms of impacting on the project. So we just absorbed all the comments. But what I took overall was that we now had a matrix that represented the client's requirements now.
Yeah, okay. If we could go, please, to Bundle 13, Volume 5, page 1097. Next page, please. So, sorry, 1097. And we see here, this is a communication from Mott MacDonald to you and Darren Pike at Multiplex, dated the 15th of April 2016. And we see there a file attachment with the name Environmental Matrix Revision 5 Board Comments. And then if we go down to the next page, please. We have a message from Camille at Mott MacDonald. The first paragraph, we see there that he says, relative to the financial close comments, the environmental matrix is given status B. What did you understand him to mean by giving the approval status B in relation to the financial close comments?
to be honest, I didn't differentiate. It was basically we had this matrix and it was now status B and we could proceed.
Okay, and if we can just zoom back out of the document, please. And then the final paragraph reads, IHSL are also reminded that the reference design has no relevance to the current contract, and IHSL are to comply with the project agreement, and in particular the BCRs and PCPs. Any non-compliance with the BCRs or PCPs should be highlighted to the board. What did you understand that to mean?
Well, I took that as a standard statement. In reality, it was a line under the sand. We now had the status B environmental matrix, so we could proceed. There was a comment about the reference design, which was the Hulling-Kirkwood pack that had the modelling information and the issues over what they had modelled in terms of overheating in some of the spaces, but we accepted that reference design was not mandatory. So that was fine. And then in terms of the complying with the BCRs, again, that was the environmental matrix. So we took this as a concluding statement that if we were going to deviate from the environmental matrix and the figures quoted within it, we would need to highlight it to the board.
Okay, so are you distinguishing then between the environmental matrix and the reference design? You see those as different things?
Yeah, so my understanding was the reference design was the Hulling-Kirkwood pack that effectively Wallace Whittle had to take ownership of that. So they took design responsibility because within that they had modelled, Hulling-Kirkwood had modelled a space. Hulling-Kirkwood's view was that it wouldn't overheat it for air changes, and Wallace Whittle done their own modelling to ensure that that was correct, and they then took that design responsibility. But we knew that that was not part of the contract, and we had to prove to ourselves that it wouldn't overheat.
Okay. I'm just going to read out to you what Graham Greer of Mott MacDonald says about that paragraph that we've just been looking at. And this is at paragraph 30 of his witness statement. And we just keep that document on screen, so we don't need to go to Mr. Greer's statement, but I'll read from it. So the reference for that is Witness Statement Bundle Volume 2 at page 13. And what Mr. Greer says is, this email reminded Project Co that they had responsibility for the development and design of their environmental matrix. They could not simply rely upon the environmental matrix which had been issued to them as part of the reference design. Project Co had responsibility to develop their environmental matrix so that it complied with the BCRs and SHTM 0301. This is just one example of several reminders which NHSL's project team had to send to Project Co during the construction phase to drive home to them that they had responsibility for developing the design. To what extent do you agree with what Mr. Greer says, and to what extent do you take issue with it?
Well, I don't agree with it, and I would have thought that if that was the view, it would have said it in this particular ACONEX, more specific. However, when you look back to the time when we were working together producing this, we were in the same building. We were working together closely. We had meetings every week, sometimes 2 and 3 times a week. You know, and the relationship was good. So I would have expected, because there were other issues that where people would come to me with something from Mott's, or I might go and speak to them about something. So if there was a genuine concern, I would have expected somebody to have discussed it with me.
Okay. And if we could go, please, to bundle 13, volume 2, page 649. This is moving on slightly. It's 17 October 2016, and it's an email from Mott MacDonald to you, amongst others, again about the environmental matrix. And it reads, the board have reviewed the environmental matrix and still has significant concerns on items. Oh, sorry, my lord. So it's from Mott MacDonald to you and others, 17th of October 2016. The board have reviewed the environmental matrix and still has significant concerns on items that do not appear to comply with the BCRs. And then they set out some general comments, 6 of those, and then they have some specific comments. And if we just scroll down to the next page, please. And it finishes up by saying that whilst the board has noted general and specific comments above, the board reminds Project Co that unless the board has already accepted a derogation, it is Project Co's obligation to comply with the BCRs, SHTMs, etc., and the board not commenting does not remove that obligation on Project Co. Now, Mott MacDonald appear there to be saying, are they not, that it's for Project Co to bring the matrix into line with SHTM recommendations. Do you accept that?
I'm trying to, which revision of the environmental matrix was that? Is that the 07 one? On the dates, I'm trying to get clear in my mind.
Just bear with me. That's revision 7. So that's the version that was returned by the board at level C. So level 5 having been returned approved, then this version, revision 7, was returned at level C rejected.
Yeah, so putting that into context, my opinion in terms of industry good practice is that once something's been reviewed through RDD, you don't get another bite of the cherry, shall we say. It would only be changes that have been made that would be reviewed. So that's my experience with the RDD process generally. What we had here was a situation where the matrix had been approved, and in addition to that, that triggered, departmental designs, which by that sort of date had been also approved. And then there was an emerging issue over 4 beds. And what it appeared to me was that there was now an ambition to back out of what had been approved. And this was just an attempt to now reject the matrix. So that's the context of it, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And in relation to the comment that you asked me about on the final paragraph, the obligation to comply with the BCRs, well, my view was that we were complying with the BCRs because that was the environmental matrix, which was the client's requirements.
So yes, I mean, to you, could you understand what he meant when if you were sitting there taking the environmental matrix as being the board construction requirements, what did you understand him to mean by saying that it was Project Co's obligation to comply with the BCRs, and the board not commenting on the matrix doesn't remove that obligation on Project Co?
At the time, I didn't analyse it to that extent.
Yeah.
My view was we had an approved document that had the board's requirements that they wanted.
Mm.
And so I guess thinking about it now, it's not clear as to then how does it, the board not comment, because they already had commented and given us the level B. So, but I didn't really analyse that at that particular point, to be honest, as to what he really meant.
Because what we have is, you're saying that you take the matrix as the health board's brief. The health board is coming back with lots of comments and dissatisfaction with the matrix. And telling you that the matrix had to comply with the BCRs and the SHTMs. It just seems a bit of a, if the matrix really is the brief, it seems to be a bit of a circular problem.
Yeah, but in the background, if you know that you have signed off a document that has now allowed various departments to have, mechanical services in terms of ductwork actually be under manufacturer, you then have an issue, and therefore, perhaps it could be seen as trying to back out of approvals, because I guess when you look at some of the comments that were made, are they level C in this list?
What do you mean, are they level C?
Well, because the whole matrix was rejected level C, when you actually look at what the comments were, are they significant?
Right. And we can scroll, if you want to scroll briefly over them. Was it your view that in general terms, that they weren't all that significant?
From memory, it was difficult to understand why you could reject it after approving it. And in reality, but there was this other emerging issue that was appearing.
Yeah. Okay, and you say emerging issue, are you talking there about the issue of the pressure arrangement for the multi-bed rooms?
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to that. So you explain in your statement that NHSL wanted to have balanced pressure for the multi-bed rooms, and you describe that as a change. And can you just confirm why you viewed that as a change?
Well, the client's requirements stated that for the multi-beds, it was to be Fourier changes in positive. And now there was a request to make it either balanced or negative.
Okay. So the view that it's a change rests on your view that the environmental matrix represented NHSL's brief for the ventilation.
But in addition to that, there were also the departments where there was detailed design done and all submitted for RDD.
Mm-hmm.
That also had been approved at which represented the environmental matrix. So it wasn't just environmental matrix, there was a whole series of other aspects that had been reviewed and agreed, in my opinion.
Okay. And in dealing with this change proposal in relation to the pressure, was it necessary in your view to ensure that the change design complied with SHTM guidance?
Well, the way it was dealt with was that it was very much, the design as it stood had complied with the client's requirements. There was now an issue raised that they wanted something different, and therefore the way Multiplex dealt with it was, well, okay, fair enough, let's see what you want now, and we'll see what we can do to deliver that. But the design wasn't led by Wallace Whittle.
So I mean, my question was whether it was necessary, in your view, to ensure the changed design was compliant with SHTM guidance. Should we take your answer as no, that what was necessary was for it to comply with the new instruction from the client?
Yeah.
If we could go, please, to Bundle 13, Volume 2, at page 668. This is Brian Rutherford at Wallace Whittle to Stuart McKechnie and yourself, amongst others, 9th of February 2017. Headed up multi-bedroom ductwork amendment proposals. And he says, all further to our ventilation workshop on Monday, please find enclosed a copy of our multi-bedrooms ventilation amendment proposal to achieve room balance, proposed solution to rooms identified as being of concern. And then if we scroll down 4 pages, please, to 672. Is this the proposal produced by Wallace Whittle in response to the workshop?
Yeah, so Wallace Whittle were listening to what was being asked, and then they took an action to go away and pull something together that represented what was being asked to then further debate it.
Okay, so this was Wallace Whittle's proposal for achieving the request for balanced pressure in the multi-bedrooms that the Health Board had made.
Yeah.
And we see this as headed up, proposed solution to rooms identified as being of concern. Who was it that had identified rooms as being of concern?
Who was it? I think it was the NHS, I think.
NHS Lothian.
Yeah.
And just why was there a concern about them?
Well, it was to do with the fact that they weren't what they now wanted in terms of the pressure regime.
Okay. Do you see there rooms D and E on that list have the room number reference with B1 in it? Are those rooms in the critical care department?
Yeah.
And if we go over the page, please, to see F, was that also in the critical care department? Yeah. And we see there if we just read the one in F, the proposal is to reduce the ventilation down to 3 air changes per hour. And then reading on, this will achieve balanced room pressure. So do we understand that the reduction in air changes was Wallace Whittle's method of achieving the balanced pressure in the rooms?
Yeah, it was an option that they, listening to what was being asked for at the workshop, that this is, they looked at the design back in the office and they looked to see what they could do with existing equipment that had been specified and in some cases installed.
Okay. The recipients of the email included various representatives of NHS Lothian, including Brian Curry, Ronnie Henderson, and various representatives from Mock MacDonald. Do you know if they understood this proposal included rooms in the critical care department?
I couldn't comment if they knew or not, but what I do know is that Wallace Whittle pulled together. We're only talking about 20 rooms, so it's not like the original Matrix that had so many rooms that it could be difficult to follow. So they pulled together a set of drawings that showed exactly where they were in the building, and that was what was used as the agenda to talk through what would be acceptable. So
if we go to page 670, please. You see there a drawing with D, E and F marked on it. Does that correspond to the critical care rooms that we saw on the document?
Yeah.
And does that greyed out area where those arrows are pointing, is that the critical care department?
Yeah.
And as far as you know, would the members of NHSL's project team have appreciated that that diagram showed the critical care department?
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly familiar to me, so I'm assuming everybody working on the project to this degree would have known, but my understanding was that these departments had their own clinical team, and so the various iterations of the report and the discussions, the team that were at the meeting from the NHS would go away, and I presume that they were discussing with whoever was responsible for these different departments and coming back with what they could or could not do or accept.
I mean, the discussions about the multi-bed rooms lasted for some months, and there were a number of versions of this proposal or this document which were discussed. Is that right?
Yeah.
And throughout all of those discussions about the multi-bed rooms, do you recall any open discussion about the fact that 4 of them were in the critical care department?
I can't really recall if there were specifically an open discussion on it.
Do you recall any, the answer to this might follow from the first, but do you recall any discussion about the possibility that because they were in the critical care department, they might, under SHTM guidance, be subject to different recommendations for air change and pressure parameters?
There was certainly, that wasn't discussed at the meetings that we were attending, but basically the meetings that we were having was all about what is it that you want now. So there may well have been other meetings with technical advisors and the clinical team who were coming to an agreement as to what was the minimum they could accept, and therefore that might have formed those meetings that we just were not party to.
Okay. One of the things you say in your statement, and I think it was something that chimed with something that you said a moment ago, but I didn't pick up on it at the time, I'm sorry, is that the design review and optioneering was very much being led by the board. That's the way you put it in your statement. Can you just explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, so we were coming to these workshops and meetings as we've already provided a design that complies with the client's requirements. And so we were coming to listen to what the client now wanted. So it wasn't led by Multiplex.
Okay. If you could go please to Bundle 13, Volume 2, page 675. This is an email from Brian Rutherford at Wallace Whittle, 21st of February 2017. to you and Stuart McKechnie, to Darren Pike and Stuart McKechnie, you're copied in. And he says, Darren, as agreed at the meeting last Friday, see enclosed a copy of our report covering the accommodation design criteria for the single rooms and the multi-bed wards. Then if we could scroll down. We've got there, so yeah, scroll down. We've got there Appendix 1 from SHTM 0301. And then if we scroll down another couple of pages, we have a report here from Wallace Whittle, headed up Accommodation Design Criteria, Single Rooms and Multi-Bed Wards. So this appears to have been exchanged only between Wallace Whittle and Multiplex. What was its purpose?
I don't really recall that report. I don't know if because it's addressed to Darren, whether Darren had asked for that.
So you don't remember that?
I'm just reading the contents of it.
Well, take your time.
I'm not sure if that formed part of the discussions between Multiplex and Project Co, where a request for a change was. I wasn't party to that dialogue, but it could have been something along those lines.
Okay. I mean, I won't spend too much time on it if you don't remember the document, but if just reading from the introduction, it says, we've carried out an internal review of the design solutions for single and multi-occupancy wards against the ventilation requirements of SHTM 0301. And then if you scroll down to the bottom page, the next page, 679, the conclusion is, as demonstrated above, the current designs for the single rooms and general ward areas are fully in compliance with SHTM 0301. Were Multiplex interested in knowing at this point whether or not the existing design complied with the SHTM 0301 guidance?
I'm not sure why it would say that, because obviously it's the client's requirements that we would be looking for compliance with. But so this might have been a separate request for some reason to review that. I just don't recall that report.
I mean, that's why I was wondering that your evidence has been that Multiplex and Wallace Whittle were designing to the environmental matrix, but here we have a document passing between Multiplex and Wallace Whittle where the focus is on compliance with SHTM 0301.
Yeah, there might have been an additional request because the focus was starting to move to does it comply, do the designs comply with SHTM? Mm-hmm. There was that debate starting to come in, and maybe Darren had asked for Wallace Whittle to verify that, just so that he had a fuller information as to the bigger picture. But that type of the contractual wrangles and all that sort of aspect, I just wasn't involved in.
Okay. You were the sort of technical side rather than the commercial side.
And the way it's Multiplex do that, it allows the designs to progress and not get bogged down with these other aspects, so it gets taken away and it's dealt with by the more senior team, really.
Okay. In the midst of this discussion over the multi-bed rooms, Wallace Whittle asked for a line-by-line review of the environmental matrix. And just to put that in context, if we go to Bundle 13, Volume 2, page 1045, and you should see just at the bottom there, Mr. Hall, an email from you to various people, Multiplex and Mott MacDonald, 20th of September 2017. And you say, Camille, Stuart, which I take to be reference to Stuart McKechnie, is insistent that the meeting you requested to go over the comments still be held so we can get full agreement at the meeting with all stakeholders. And then up at the top, another email from you to Camille saying, Thursday 28th suits Wallace Whittle, 10 a.m. Intention is to go through all comments made, the WW response, and get full agreement to close this out. Can the relevant people attend the meeting who are familiar with the comments made? And then if we go down to page 1048, we've got a note that you've taken of that meeting. And this is a note by you dated the 5th of October 2017, and it's about the environmental matrix meeting on the 28th of September 2017. And you confirm the discussions. And at point 2, what you say is TÜV Süd, so essentially Wallace Whittle, requested a review line by line. Mott's noted if TÜV Süd can confirm a check has been made line by line, then there was no requirement to do a line by line check. TÜV Süd confirmed the line by line check had been carried out in their office. Item closed. What's your understanding of why TÜV Süd requested a line by line review?
Well, there was an element of frustration and also concern, given, I think, was this revision 9 of the matrix? This, or the kind of date period, trying to...
Bear with me.
I think it was revision 10.
Yeah, so revision 9 was approved in July 2017 and revision 11 in November 2017. So
yeah,
probably revision 11, I think.
Yeah, so I mean, the date time of that was everything had been through RDD, all the approvals had been made. The site, was installing. And Stuart's concern was that, how many more times are we going to get this environmental matrix back with more comments? It seemed there wasn't a realisation that, the site was under construction, and he was quite insistent, as I've recorded, that he wanted the people who were making the comments to be in a meeting, and he wanted to go through them all, and he wanted to make sure that there were no more comments coming, because his view was this was the client's brief, and he was continually getting more comments, and he was getting concerned. And I think he put a few proposals. Mott's offices were in Glasgow, and his office was in Glasgow, and he was willing to send his own people down. And, there was different scenarios, but his main issue was, he wanted the matrix concluded with all the client's requirements and no more comments, really.
Okay. And so what he had wanted was a line-by-line review. And what MacDonald say in response to that is that a line-by-line check is not necessary if Tooth Sood can confirm that they've done one. Why did you understand Mott MacDonald to be satisfied by Tooth Sood having done a review without their involvement?
Well, Tooth Sood could only review that, for instance, the detailed design drawings tied in with what the matrix had. But the bit they couldn't do was, is this really what the client wants?
Yeah, so if that was your view, that you needed Mott's input to confirm the environmental matrix, did you challenge Mott MacDonald on the idea that it was enough for Tooth Sood to do it on their own?
Well, you can't force. Effectively, it's your client, and if they're telling you that it's not needed, it's you've got a relationship there to build and maintain, so you can't go against what they're saying. And so that's why it was minuted. It was basically so that if there was an issue further down the line, we could say, well, we asked for it, it was felt it wasn't needed, and that's where we got to with it.
Okay. So did you effectively take reassurance from the fact that Mott MacDonald said they didn't need a line-by-line check?
By that time, I was concerned as well, because we were up at revision 11 and there was no indication that the comments were going to stop by that time.
Just excuse me, Mr. McClellan, I'm sure the fault's mine. I'm not sure that I really understand what's meant by a line-by-line check in this context. I mean, Mr. Hall made the point that you've got to check one thing against another, and I'm not sure what the one thing or the other is.
I'm obliged, my lord. Would it be correct to understand the reference to a line-by-line review as meaning a line-by-line review of the environmental matrix in and of itself?
Yeah.
Is that what you understood Mr. McKechnie to be talking about?
That was what I took it as, to actually take the environmental matrix and now it might be that part of the debate you could have narrowed it down, but my take on it was that he wanted to ensure that the drawings that he'd produced and that were all approved through the RDD represented what the client wanted in terms of the environmental matrix. And by going through the different lines, you could have, by department, probably, you could get to a stage where you say everybody's in agreement.
So we're talking about literally line by line, of which there may be, 4,000 lines, perhaps.
Yeah, but perhaps you could, because there was no more detail done on it, but you could, for instance, then on an Excel spreadsheet, you could maybe narrow it down by department. Mm-hmm. And then by department, you would then perhaps narrow it down by room types. So there's ways to do it, but we never got into that detail. But Stuart's starting point was he wanted a line by line.
So one thing you're comparing is what appears in the spreadsheet as against, now you mentioned drawings, but anything else? Again, I may be being a bit slow, but yes, Mr. Hall.
No, there's bits, it's a bit like a jigsaw, so you might be reviewing it against schedules, design schedules, the drawings. You could introduce other aspects like change. There's a series of items that if you were really doing it line by line, you might introduce all that. But the detail of we didn't get into.
No. Right. Okay. So what I'm taking away from that one, although it wasn't actually carried out, what Mr. McKechnie had in mind was a literal checking. It wasn't just a sort of expression of exasperation.
No, because the concern was that each version that was put in was coming back with more comments, and those comments perhaps had an impact on the detailed design drawings that had already been approved. And in addition to that, because they had already been approved, they were getting manufactured or they were getting installed.
Yeah. Sorry, Mr. McLaren.
No, I'm obliged, my lord. And if you just read what you record at points 3 and 4 there, Mr. Hall, you say on point 3, feedback from MOTS is that subject to the 11 clarifications required for revision 10, this concludes the review of the matrix. So was that a sort of some reassurance that you were getting to the end of the process of revising it?
Yeah, some reassurance, yeah.
And then point 4, multi-bedrooms were not discussed at this meeting. Matrix will require to be updated once the changes are instructed. So was the idea that once final agreement had been reached on the technical solution for the multi-bedrooms, the matrix would be changed to reflect whatever was agreed?
Yeah.
Now, if you could go, please, to Bundle 13, Volume 2, page 1242. This is an email from you to Stuart McKechnie and various people at Mott MacDonald and NHS Lothian, recording the outcome of a meeting on the 12th of April 2018, and it's given the subject heading 4-bed workshop summary. And what you seem to have recorded here is the key points discussed. Item number 1, what you note is Stuart McKechnie noted concerns on agreement from the previous workshop number 1 that the objective of workshop number 2 was to obtain agreement in principle on the draft drawings being tabled to allow progress to continue on 4-bed design. This was due to NHSL held up at another meeting and no delegated authority at the workshop. And then below that, action, concerns resolved as Ronnie Henderson joined the workshop at 13:30. What did you understand to be Mr. Henderson's authority at that meeting?
Well, it was a decision-making authority because, it was a moving situation where proposals were getting put on the table. We needed people at the meeting to agree that that was, in principle, what was now required to allow Wallace Whittle to move that along to the next stage. And so, many times before we'd had at these meetings where predominantly Mott's had to take all the stuff away to then debate it with the NHS, I think, and then, you would get a response back. But this issue was too pressing and we needed the decision makers in the room, and it appeared that Ronnie was the decision maker.
Okay, so you took him as having authority on behalf of NHSL to make decisions about the 4-bedroom solution. And then item 2.0, under the heading of 4-bed agenda item, 14 rooms in question tabled based on the previous revision 5 schedule, rooms cross-referenced, drawings against the schedule, see attached schedule and drawings, etc. Revision 5 schedule, is that a reference to revision 5 of Wallace Whittle's proposal for the multi-bedrooms?
Yeah.
Then reading down to item 6, NHSL confirmed agreement in principle to the strategy tabled. So when you say NHSL, was that Ronnie Henderson?
Well, the only person from NHSL at that meeting was Ronnie.
And you say confirmed agreement to the strategy table. Did you take that as agreement to the Wallace-Whittle proposal for the multi-bed rooms?
Yeah.
And then just below it, there's item 7, spare capacity. TÜV tabled the initial draft assessment, and it reads, supply, no impact, as being maintained at 4 air changes per hour as per the environmental matrix. Can you explain what that means, please?
Yeah, so part of the review that TÜV had to do back in their office was looking at their calculations and seeing what spare capacity they could have in their air handling units, basically a big fan that produces air, and it's either sucking or blowing in basic terms. So their analysis was that the supply was going to be remaining the same, so there was no change. So that would remain at 4 air changes an hour, which was what was listed in the environmental matrix. And then you'll see in terms of the extract, the spare capacity was getting used up because more was needed to give this balanced in the rooms.
Okay, so the point really is that there was a discussion about air change rates at the same meeting where the proposal for the multi-bed rooms was agreed in principle.
Yeah, it was an all-encompassing, and it was effectively an impact analysis Wallace-Whittle were doing on what was being asked for now.
And if we just scroll down to page 1246, is this a record of the attendees at that meeting?
The 12th of April, I didn't catch what date my minutes were, to be honest. But
So it was, if we go back to page 1242, just in the block of text at the top of your note, it says date and time, 12th of April 2018 at 1 o'clock. Then if we go down to 1246, we see date of meeting 12th of April 2018, time 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
M&E workshop. Were those the attendees at that meeting?
Yeah.
So do we see that in addition to Ronnie Henderson, there was Colin McRae from Mott MacDonald and a Douglas Anderson from Mott MacDonald and Camille Kolodjicek, amongst others? Now, if we go to page 1, so bundle 13, volume 2, page 1235. So this is the day after the meeting. Again, Brian Rutherford at Wallace-Whittle, to people at Multiplex, including you. Colin, please see enclosed a copy of the revised ward ventilation proposals to achieve a room balance at 4 air changes per hour. Now, up until this point, the Wallace-Whittle proposal had been, or had involved, a reduction in the air change rates from 4 air changes per hour to 3 air changes per hour. And so this encloses a proposal to do it at 4 air changes per hour. So why had the proposal been revised to use a higher air change rate?
From memory, it wasn't acceptable to the NHS. I think they had debated it out with the meeting we were in, and they'd come back and said that they didn't want that.
And why had it only been raised to 4 air changes per hour?
I don't really know what the discussions were at these meetings that they had, and so I'm not sure I could really say.
Okay, so you weren't looking behind it. You understood that the health board wanted it to be 4 air changes.
Yeah, because we were listening to what that feedback was that they wanted, and then Wallace Whittle were trying to, provide that.
Okay, if we could go to Bundle 13, Volume 2, page 1255, please. And this is an email from Ronnie Henderson in response to your note of the meeting on the 12th of April. Mr. Henderson's email is the 18th of April, 2018. He says to you, "Hi Ken, I note the attached schedule revision 5 still refers to air change rates between 2.7 and 3.5. We were seeking design for 4 air changes to all 14 rooms. Can you confirm that this is the brief to Wallace Whittle?" So the reference there to schedule revision 5, that's presumably to the version of the Wallace Whittle multi-bed room proposal in circulation at the time. Does that seem right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so we have here Mr. Henderson asking for 4 air changes. But do you accept that when Mr. Henderson asks for 4 air changes per hour, he's coming at that from the perspective that he wants something higher than the 3 air changes being proposed by Wallace Whittle?
Yes.
So he's trying to increase the number of air changes.
Yeah.
If we could go please to Stuart McKechnie's witness statement, which is witness statement bundle 2, page 180. And it's paragraph 52. So this is what Mr. McKechnie says about the multi-bed room issue. He says, NHSL wish to explore the potential consequences involved when changing from 4 air changes within bedrooms, as set out in the environmental matrix and accepted design drawings, and design 10 air changes from the adjacent bathrooms. We were advised that as part of our review, we could consider reducing the 4 air change supply rate to 120 litres per second, which would align with the building standards vent rate for 12 occupants. So that's what Mr. McKechnie says. Now, we'll ask him about this tomorrow, but he appears to be saying here that NHSL were driven by a desire to change the air change rates, whereas the impression from the documents is that they were driven by a desire to change the pressure in the room. Which of those was your understanding?
Well, they were looking at both because they are linked, to in terms of the air coming in and going away, ultimately impacts on the pressure of the room.
Mm-hmm.
So this particular bit was at one of the meetings where, from I recall that it was about what's the minimum to comply type question. Because we were in a situation that all that equipment was predominantly installed. And so it was very much about optioneering and seeing what the permutations were. And one of them was, in terms of the building standards, I think would it comply with that? Mm-hmm. And that's based on how many people you have in a room and that's how they calculate that. So I think that was one option that the NHS looked at.
I mean, do you accept that the NHSL came into this debate about the multi-bed rooms motivated by a desire to change the pressure arrangement? They weren't motivated by a desire to change the air changes.
I think that the initial issue was that the client's requirements asked for a pressure that they no longer wanted. And so, the motivation probably was that to start with, but the air changes are linked to the pressure. And therefore, you can't exclude one from the other.
Yes, and insofar as the air change rates were changed, that was initially by Wallace Whittle as a means of achieving what the Health Board wanted. So the air changes were changed down to 3 as a means of bringing about the balanced pressure arrangement.
Yeah.
And insofar as the Health Board were making decisions about air changes, what we actually see is that Mr. Henderson sought to increase the air changes.
Yeah, that's...
If we can go please to Graham Greer's witness statement at witness statement bundle 2, page 34. Thank you. You just bear with me, Mr. Hall. Okay, you see that about 5 lines from the top, there's a sentence that begins, when Project Co. You see that? Just beside the hand.
Yeah.
And what Mr. Greer says is that when Project Co were first invited to provide a proposal to achieve balanced pressure, their design, this is in the multi-bed rooms, their design included a proposal to reduce the air change to between 3 air changes per hour and 2.7 air changes per hour. The air change rate was therefore always an integral part of the technical solution required to reverse engineer balanced pressure into Project Co's design. Now, I take him to mean that the choice of air change rates for the multi-bed rooms was constrained by Wallace Whittle's existing design. Is that fair?
Constrained. Well, I mean, anything's possible. So the forum here was, what is it that you need? What is it that you want? Because, in terms of the sort of solutions, you can bring air from other areas. You can, you can do something. And so if somebody had said they wanted 50 air changes, we would have had to look at a solution that would provide 50. So, I'm not sure it's strictly correct to say that it's constrained by the current design.
It's maybe a question to be followed up with Mr. McKechnie, but if when the multi-bed room proposal was under discussion, as well as saying the pressure regime was to be balanced, the decision had also been to install 10 or to provide for 10 air changes. Would that have required more work than merely altering the pressure balance on its own?
Yeah, you would need to take each one individually, because what you're really doing is using spare capacity within the system. And each, depending on where all the rooms were, could be fed by a different fan. And therefore, you need to look at that and see what spare capacity you have, and then take a view on, can you get more out it to meet whatever figure that you're now trying to achieve.
I mean, that's sort of speaking in generalities, but in the specifics of the critical care department, at the time the proposal was under discussion to have balanced pressure instead of positive. If instead of doing that at 4 air changes, you were trying to do it at 10, would the work required have been greater than it was to bring about balanced pressure at 4 air changes?
Yeah, I would say so, because it's quite a higher number, and it's unlikely to have that kind of spare capacity within the system.
Okay. If you go please to Bundle 13, Volume 2, page 1268. If we can scroll down a couple of pages, please. So this, it looks like, I think it's revision 6 of the Wallace-Whittle proposal, and we can see that it's stamped and signed by Brian Curry, approved at level B under the RDD process. And we see some handwritten comments there to the left.
Yeah.
Whose handwriting is that? It looks like it might be Brian Curry's. So that...
I think the way it was done, it's certainly not Multiplex's, it's from the board, but I think somebody prepared the document and then it was just given to Brian to sign.
Okay, and the second comment there is about rooms D, E and F, and we see the B1 references. So this is a comment about the rooms in critical care.
Yeah.
And what he says is these rooms do not have en suites. And then if we could scroll up to see rooms D and E. And if we just read the proposed solution for room D, they're materially similar. It says retain the supply ventilation at 4 air changes per hour and the ensuite ventilation at 10 air changes per hour. Now that reference to en suites wasn't in previous versions of this proposal. And do you know why they were added?
I don't know.
But Brian Curry notes that the rooms don't in fact have en suites.
Yeah.
Just while we're here, we can note that the air changes in the proposal are now 4 air changes, as Mr. Henderson had asked for. And then if you go to Bundle 13, Volume 2, page 1279, and we can see here that this is issue number 7, so it's the next version on of this document. And if we scroll down, I think 3 pages, please, we can see that this one's been approved at level A by Janice McKenzie of NHSL on the 26th of July 2018. And if we go back up to rooms D, E and F, please, we see there that the reference to the ensuite ventilation has been removed. But you don't know why there was one version of this which introduced the idea of an ensuite in these rooms and then took it out?
No.
And then if we can scroll down a couple of pages, please. You see that a note now appears at the bottom of the proposal, and note number 2, bedroom ventilation is based on a, I've lost it. Bedroom ventilation is based on a fresh air rate allowance of 10 litres per second in line with SHTM 0301. What do you understand that to be about?
I think that's a similar point to the one that we looked at before with the building standards. Probably best for Wallace Whittle to comment on that, but I think, thinking back, I think there might have been a line in the SHTM that perhaps referred you to the building standards. I'm just not sure.
Okay. And then volume 13, bundle 2, page 1337, please. An email from you to Mr. Kolodjacek and Mott MacDonald and Ronnie Henderson, NHSL, and you say, dated 5th July 2018, you say, Camille, Ronnie, Wallace Whittle have pulled out an extract of the matrix dealing with the update for your information for the 4-bed wards. These are the only changes being made to the 4 beds in line with revision 7 of the 20-room schedule previously issued through RDD. Let me know if there are any comments on this matrix extract. And if we go down to page 1340, we can see the attachment. And if you can just expand that a little bit, please. Do we see there that for the the second column, or the first column rather, we've got the 4 rooms with the B1 reference. And then reading along, if we can just scroll along to the right, please. Do we see there that the supply and extract ventilation for each of these rooms is provided for at 4 air changes per hour?
Yeah.
Did you get any comments or objections to that from Mr. Henderson or Mr. Kolodjacek?
No.
Sorry, Mr. Hall, what did you say?
No.
No.
Not that I can recall.
Okay, we know from other evidence that those arrangements, that technical solution for the multi-bed rooms was documented in Settlement Agreement 1, which was signed in February 2019. If we could just quickly have a look at the schedule to that, please, which is Bundle 13, Volume 1, at page 805. Are you familiar with this document, Mr. Hall?
Yeah, I had some involvement. Yeah.
So down at the bottom, we've been talking up till now about the multi-bed rooms, but now down at the bottom we see the agreed resolution of the issue to do with single bedroom ventilation. And what the schedule says is that the board and project co agree this item is closed and the agreed technical solution approved through the review procedure and agreed by the board and project co is resolving this dispute. And if you could just scroll down, please, is as set out in disputed work schedule appendix 1 item 13. And if we could go please to page, what's in bundle 13 volume 1 page 797. The document's headed up disputed work schedule, appendix 1, item 13. Is that the document that was referred to in the schedule we looked at a moment ago?
Well, the schedule spoke about the RDD process.
Yes.
So the environmental matrix that obviously went through the RDD has had the design drawings for all the single bedrooms.
Yeah, the schedule that we looked at a moment ago said that the solution to the single bed ventilation issue was as set out in disputed work schedule Appendix 1, item 13. And I was just wondering if that's the document that it was referring to. If you don't know, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I couldn't be confident because the single bedroom vent started as 2 changes.
Do you recognise the document that we're looking at on screen just now? Are you familiar with that?
I think I've seen it at some point, yeah. Those kind of changes, it wasn't me that was dealing with,
Okay.
certainly in the single bedroom one.
Who was dealing with that?
I think that might have been Leanne that was dealing with the changes.
Leanne
Edwards. Whereas in the 4-bed, we actually had I was involved in that, and we had a pack that was formed into the, but my understanding for the single bedroom was it was because that pack wasn't available, it was what had been previously approved through RDD, so the design drawings for all the single bedrooms that had already been reviewed.
Mm-hmm. My lord, I note the time. It's 4 o'clock. I suspect if it was convenient for everybody involved to sit on until 4:30, I could probably get Mr. Hall finished today.
Right. I think my preference, and perhaps your preference, Mr. Hall, would be to finish. You quite happy to sit on?
Yeah,
sit on without a further break.
Yeah.
Well, as I say, if you ever want to take a break, just indicate that. I don't think I'd want to go beyond 4:30, Ms. McLennan, but by all means, let's sit until then.
Okay, I'm obliged, my lord. As you know, I think, Mr. Hall, in June 2019, NHSL brought in IOM to carry out an independent validation of the ventilation systems for theatres and other critical areas. Was that something that you had expected to happen?
It's an area of I don't have any expertise in the commissioning side.
Okay.
And I'd said in my statement that I had no involvement in that side. So the pre-construction, that was me, but not the construction element. That was a different team.
Okay. Are you aware, Mr. Hall, of NHS guidance or an NHS process under NHS guidance called High Scribe, the Healthcare Associated Infection System for Controlling Risk in the Built Environment?
I am aware of it, yes.
Are you familiar with the guidance about it?
Only in so much as we obviously, on this project at stage 1, we were called upon in terms of the ventilation in the single bedroom. So I'm aware of the 4 stages, and there's a requirement for the contractor to input at certain stages, more for me at the start where it's designed rather than the construction element.
Yes. Okay. Well, it's really that the design aspect that I'm interested in. If we could go to Bundle 13, Volume 3, page 464, please. So this is SHFN 30, which is Part B of the guidance on high scribe, and this is the version from October 2014. And if we just go to page 470, please. And it's talking here about, you see the heading, the challenge, and it reads that paragraph 1.3, patients using healthcare facilities are more likely to be immunocompromised and also more likely to receive intensive medical interventions, which in turn increase their vulnerability to opportunistic infections. Every effort must be taken to acknowledge and ultimately reduce these risks. This includes risks associated with the built environment that can arise from, for example, demolition, construction and refurbishment activities. And then paragraph 1.4, picking up halfway down. For healthcare-associated infections to be reduced, it is imperative that infection prevention and control measures are designed in and IPC risks are designed out at the very outset of the planning and design stages of a healthcare facility, and the input continues up to, into and beyond the final building stage. And then 1.5, to achieve this, it is necessary that designers, architects, engineers, facilities managers and planners work in collaborative partnership with IPC teams, healthcare staff and users to deliver facilities in which IPC needs have been anticipated, planned for and met. So to the extent that you were involved in meetings and discussions about ventilation parameters at the RHCYP, did you think that those meetings and discussions reflected the guidance here about the importance of collaborative partnership?
The MEP is slightly different compared to, say, perhaps the architectural side. And so, in my opinion, it's more about a supporting role. So if we take what happened on before financial close, there was a stage 1 review, and then what was flagged up was a possible issue on the pressures for single bedrooms. And that then triggered the designers had to be brought in to then do a proposal. So that's kind of my experience for the MEP side, that you'd be supporting rather than, fully involved. And so here we took our lead really from, I guess, MOTS to feedback anything that was an issue and to contribute where required. So it's probably more an ad hoc arrangement we have. So in terms of MEP.
So there was an extended process for consideration of the ventilation parameters in the multi-bed rooms, which resulted in a design solution which for the critical care rooms, only a matter of months later, the health board decided didn't achieve what it wanted to achieve. And the question really is, do you think if there had been more collaboration amongst the designers and clinicians or IPC teams, that outcome would have been less likely to occur?
Well, we weren't party to the collaboration on the 4 beds because we were ultimately just listening for what the solution was. So I don't know if that behind the scenes happened. Mm-hmm. Whereas on the single beds, it was this kind of formal review where we were called in to comment and obviously amend the solution from being positive to negative. So I don't know what went on with the 4 beds, to be honest.
So do you think it might have made a difference to the outcome if you'd been invited along or you and the designers had been invited along to the meetings with the clinicians about it?
No, because we were taking a role that we were effectively waiting to hear what the client wanted on this particular item.
Okay. Are you aware that SHTM 0301 was revised in February 2022?
I am aware of it, yeah.
Have you worked with that revised guidance since it came in?
No.
Have you had the opportunity to consider the guidance or to read it or anything of that nature?
I read the update through the magazine and some of the changes that we're making.
I mean, are you aware that one of the changes it's made is to introduce something called the ventilation safety group?
Yeah.
And what are your views about that? Do you have any views about whether that's a good development or otherwise?
Yeah, it seems to cover some of the issues, ironically, that we have on this project. And so, to bring infection control as part of the safety group, I think is a good thing. The issue about derogations is a good thing. In reality, I don't know how that will pan out in terms of it being applied, but in theory, it should remove some of the issues that we currently have here.
Yeah, so you mentioned there derogations. If we could go to bundle 1, page 2288, please. This is what the revised version of the guidance says about the VSG's role in relation to derogations.
Thank you.
Paragraph 4.10 says that any derogations or alternative design strategies from this guidance should be subject to the scrutiny and agreement in writing by the VSG, Ventilation Safety Group. The reason for the derogation or alternative design strategy and limits to its application should be recorded. Designers proposing a derogation or alternative design strategy should be able to supply a body of evidence that their proposal will provide a degree of safety no less than if the guidance in this document had been followed. And is that the issue in relation to derogations, which you think would be a welcome improvement?
Yeah.
If we could go please to page 2402. At paragraph 12.6. I hear what you said a moment ago, Mr. Hall, that you don't tend to be involved at the validation or commissioning stage. But this is a proposal about, or a piece of guidance rather, about the involvement of the validating engineer at an earlier stage. And what it says is that it's essential that whoever has been appointed to carry out the final validation acceptance of the system should be involved in the initial client's brief and design specification, preferably prior to the project being put out to tender. They will then be fully aware of the client's requirements and any limiting factors. Do you have any views about that idea?
Yeah, I mean, in principle, it sounds positive. I guess the issue is whoever's doing the final validation, are they going to be available at the start or before it goes out to tender?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just missed that. In principle, positive.
Positive, but there's obviously a final validation at the end. Mm-hmm. However, what the document's saying is to get that company or organisation involved earlier.
Yeah.
And would that person, if you take a hospital, which is quite a considerable length of period before it goes out to tender and built, would it be the same party that would be available at the start?
Right. And I suppose that raises the question as to what we mean by the same party. I mean, it could be the same company and a different
Yeah.
a different individual.
It could be a different individual, but as you probably gathered, going through the design, everybody has their own view on MEP design or validation, and so there's always variances. And so, my view is if you bring two engineers in, they have different views.
Thank you.
Okay, so maybe practical issues around it, but the basic idea, do you think, is a good one?
It's positive.
If we could go forward, please, to page 2431. This is the latest version of the appendix summarising the ventilation parameters. And you see there's a line for general wards where some words have been added to refer to level 0 and 1 care. And then down at the critical care line, the words are added level 2 and 3 care. Do you have any observations about that as a change?
Yeah, so it looks like there's more information to then select what's required, which is positive. I think perhaps it could go a bit further in terms of adult and children, because there are some differences in terms of the design of areas, and I don't think certainly the current SHTM really deals with that.
Okay, just to expand a little bit on that. What sort of differences are there for children as from adults?
Well, we've obviously discussed this, a cohort as one aspect. I think there's also operational policies within maybe each health board that, because what happens is in the winter when the hospitals are under a lot of pressure, I think they actually take other rooms to then use to provide the nursing. And so, there's those aspects that SHTMs don't really reflect.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other areas where you think the SHTMs could be improved?
I think predominantly the biggest issue is the SHTMs are guidance, as we know. They're not a document that is easily put into a contractual form of documentation that is then you can comply with. And so I think there's a bigger issue that needs to be thought out for the future, that how do you get that type of document to work contractually?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Final topic. Are you familiar with NHS Assure, NHS Scotland Assure, which has been set up?
I've heard of them, but given I'm not doing healthcare projects at the moment, I've had no dealings with them.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Hall. I've got no more questions for you. It's possible that one of the core participants will. What we normally do is break for a short moment just to see whether or not that's the case.
We'll follow what Ms. McClellan proposes. Just before we do that, would you like us to elaborate a little on the point you made almost at the very end, which is that starting from the proposition that the SHTM is a guidance document, you suggested it was not easy to fit that sort of document into a set of contractual documents. Do you want just to expand on that point a little?
Yeah, so, the origins of an SHTM was for guidance and to use as a reference document and perhaps options to then apply to whatever is required in a particular ward. But some of the items are contradictory, and there's maybe a selection of items. If we move away from just the table A1, which I know has been a key focus, but there's 180 pages of other information, and those pages can be contradictory because they've not been written in a way that allows the document to flow and be clear on what's required, because it has been written as guidance. So you may have various sets of options that you then select what's appropriate for the particular project that you're working on. But that doesn't fit with where you get a contractual overarching document that says you have to comply with SHTMO 301. So straight away you've got a conflict that everything in that document can't be complied with.
Thank you. We'll rise for perhaps 10 minutes just to check if there's any further questions. All right. Mr McClellan?
Thank you, my lord. There is just one question from a core participant, which I'm happy to put to Mr. Hall.
Thanks, Drew. Mr. Hall, apparently one more question. Mr. McClellan.
Thank you, my lord. Thank you, Mr. Hall. If we could go, please, to Bundle 13, Volume 2, page 545. This is a question, Mr. Hall, about the single bedroom ventilation and a derogation in that context. And you see on screen there's an email from you to Camille Kolacek at Mott MacDonald, Colin McRae at Mott MacDonald, 1st of August 2016. And what you say is, Colin, Camille, read discussions and dialogue on single bedroom vent and air changes. Please find attached the derogation to close this one out. And then if you scroll down to the next page, 546, you see there, if we could maybe just zoom in on that to make it a little bit easier to read. Do you read that okay, Mr. Hall?
Yeah.
So you see it's headed up derogation request, reference WW015. The BCR clause is 8.1, minimum engineering standard. Then below that, relevant regulation is SHTM 0301. And then the next heading is requirement, and it reads compliance with SHTM. And then if we go a little bit further down, derogation, and under that heading it reads, the air change rate has been decreased within the single bedrooms from 6 air changes per hour to 4 air changes per hour. Mixed mode ventilation has been provided with additional natural vent available from the opening windows. Single bedrooms without opening windows have been provided with 6 air changes per hour. And then the proposal, single bedrooms with opening windows to have a mechanical ventilation rate of 4 air changes per hour. So we see there that this derogation request is to go from 6 air changes per hour to 4 air changes per hour. You see that?
Yep.
Now, your evidence was that you took the environmental matrix to be the Health Board's fixed brief. And the environmental matrix already specified 4 air changes per hour for the single bedrooms. So the question is, why were you preparing a derogation to a figure which was already in the environmental matrix?
Yeah, so this was aligned to the request from Mott's if a derogation was required for the en-suites. And so, for completeness, this dovetailed in with how the en-suite had been designed in terms of minimum 10. So it was basically aligning the en-suite with the bedroom and then aligning the actual designs that had went through RTD to then tie up with the environmental matrix. So it was just a kind of sweep up.
But if the environmental matrix already specified 4 air changes per hour, what need is there for a derogation down to that figure?
Well, the email that we had received from Mott's was referring to the SHTM. And so this was just aligning with the SHTM so that you had the two changes together.
Okay, I think if we can go up to page 538, please. This is an email from Kelly Bain at Mott MacDonald, 19th of May 2016. Is this the email that you were talking about just a moment ago?
Yeah.
Okay, and what she says is, "Hi all, the board have noted the number of air changes within the en-suites is higher than that required under the SHTM. The board understand this is to provide adequate air changes for the volume of air within both the en-suite and the single room, and there's not an extract fan within the bedroom. As the extract fan is in the en-suite and extracting dirty air, the board understand that no heat recovery is possible. Can Project Co please confirm the above, and if a derogation needs to be submitted for the board's approval?" So is that the context which you say prompted the production of the derogation from 6 air changes to 4 air changes?
Yeah.
And so what did you see as the function of the derogation?
Well, it was basically it reaffirmed that everybody knew what the design was. We'd just put through all the packages in terms of the different departments, and they had been approved. And effectively, this was just drawing a line under the sand that we now had all these packages. It was agreed, and we were just now, because it was the board that was requesting it, that we just close that off with a particular derogation.
Maybe it may be me, Mr. Hall, but I'm not sure I quite follow that. If the board had been asking about derogation in the context of the en-suites, why did that give rise to a derogation in relation to the air changes for the single rooms themselves?
Because the air in the en-suite was increased because there was no extract in the bedroom. And the air change in the bedroom had to be at a certain value to then match with the en-suite, because we had this debate about it had to be either balanced or negative. Mm-hmm. So it was drawing the two together to then provide what the board had wanted, where it was balanced or negative. You can't have one without the other.
Does the derogation request go from Project Co to the board? Is it the board that's being asked to approve the derogation?
Well, I think it comes under a change, so but in reality, that was what was captured in the SA further down the line. So those derogations ended up, or the change that they applied to was then changed to then just becoming part of the SA.
I think this is what's confusing me. You're talking there about change and so on. And the reason for the question is that your understanding was that the matrix was the board's fixed brief, and it already stated 4 air changes per hour in the single bedrooms. So what was the derogation for if the brief was already fixed?
Well, it just reaffirmed, because we'd had the debate before financial close where it had to be changed from positive to negative. So there was that debate, and all the single rooms had to be changed. And so, we didn't see anything other than it was, this was just reaffirming the whole package together that this is what the board wanted.
I mean, one way of looking at a derogation request is that you're effectively looking for the board's approval to a particular parameter. Is that a fair way of looking at it?
We weren't looking for approval because the actual design that was contained within the environmental matrix was defined. But this was just, as we seen it, an aspiration to get that paperwork together. We didn't see any issue. The whole process had been based around the environmental matrix, and it was agreed, and this was just about a box ticking thing because at that time the relationships were still strong. We didn't have this 4-bed until later on, and so it was just all about taking a sigh of relief. We'd got through the design process, and this was us just complying with the board to actually provide that information. But I don't think it was for us to be requesting derogation per se, because we designed to the environmental matrix, and those designs had been signed off.
Okay, if I can try and just summarise my understanding of what you said, that essentially the derogation was produced to complete the paperwork and acknowledge that the already finalised brief departed from SHTM guidance in relation to the number of air changes for the rooms. Is that a fair way of...
summary,
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Mr. Hall. I've got no more questions for you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hall. You're now free to go, but before you do go, can I repeat the thanks that I think I gave on a previous occasion for the amount of work that has been involved, not only in attending, but in preparation. I appreciate that involves a lot, but it's necessary if the inquiry is to discover what it is trying to discover. So thank you very much for that, but you're now free to go.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. We will see each other again at 10 o'clock tomorrow with Mr. McKechnie.
Stuart McKechnie.
Mr. McKechnie.